Hey, good evening, folks. My name's Steve Nelson. I was just asked to come along and give a bit of a talk about my flying career. I'm local born and bred in Adelaide, grew up in Elizabeth. Always wanted to be into aviation from a very small child. I got my interest from my father, who was a lifelong aviation buff like you guys. Spent a long time here working in the museum too. Now I grew up in Elizabeth, and you know, money was a bit scarce, so I didn't really have money for flying lessons and things. So I spent a long time in my youth building model aeroplanes and things, which I'll talk about later as well. But that's really what got me going. Yeah, I know Trevor from doing that as well. However, when I did finally decide I wanted to take a career path in flying, about the only option open to me that was affordable was the military. So I basically put my heart and soul into that, and was successful in getting into the Air Force in 1975. Did my initial flying training on the Windshield. So at that time I was actually the second to last course that trained on the Windshield, which was when you're an 18-year-old was an incredible beast. 450 horsepower, you know, 40-foot wingspan tail dragger, and it took a bit of taming when you're a youngster and you had no experience in it. Frankly, it terrified me. So anyway, I struggled through that, and I got my 67 hours, whatever it was, on that. Then went on to the Mackie, and I was a lot more comfortable in the Mackie. We made friends very quickly, and I actually got through that quite easily. I found that was a really good machine to fly. After that, I got posted to 38 Squadron Caribous in Richmond in 1976. So I'll just start off with that. Yeah, so 1976 to 79 I flew the Caribou with 38 Squadron, based there. For a lot of the aviation buffs, it's a really favourite aeroplane because it's got a lot of character, it's old, it's noisy, it's slow, and it's very versatile in what it does. And as a first basically role in the Air Force as a pilot, it was fantastic because it's a pretty simple aeroplane, but it had a very interesting multi-role. And you got command on it very early. I was actually a captain on it at 19, and then you're able to take it off around Australia, overseas and things, and do whatever the military asked you to do. Its role, well basically transport, trash hauling, but in addition to that we did a lot of other things related. We did supply dropping, we did parachuting. There was a fair bit of liaison with the Army, which involved a lot of low-level flying, formation flying, and also quite a bit of time up in New Guinea and West Papua, or Irian Jaya it was known at the time. We were doing Army mapping survey out there. So it was basically a very interesting role that I had there. And just to relate some of the interesting flying that was actually done up in New Guinea and West Papua, I don't know whether you know that most of the airfields up there in the highlands are rather different to what you expect down here in Australia. They're generally one-way strips sort of stuck in the end of dead-end valleys and up on tops of mountains and things like that. And basically there's no such thing as a normal circuit. You could go into these strips in one direction, and then you had to take off in the other direction to get out, because most of them are up on the side of a hill like that. And you couldn't get it wrong. You basically had one go to get into a lot of these strips. And some of them you were actually committed to land at 5 mile final. And after that you couldn't turn around, and you couldn't outclimb the rising terrain in every direction. So the only place you could turn around was on the runway. So it actually focused you at being quite good at getting your approaches right. Yeah, getting in and getting out. And some of the airfields were quite high, sort of 7,000 or 8,000 feet elevation, and then by the time you add the temperature correction, the density altitude, some of them were over 10,000 feet. So effectively your landing speed was about 20–25% more. So although the Caribou was very slow, it still seemed quite quick when you were landing at that sort of altitude. One of the more interesting things we got to do was flying in West Papua, which is Irian Jaya at the time. It's the other half of New Guinea, and working with the Army there on behalf of the Indonesian government, believe it or not, redoing their maps, which was actually very politically sensitive for the Australian government at the time, because they considered at the time Indonesia was their highest military threat. Yep. And yet we were doing their maps for them. So there's a lot of intel and spooks running around and everything else like that. And we were actually taking quite a lot of photographs and things of what we were seeing while we were flying around.
What were you seeing?
Well, not a lot actually, just basically these villages and things, but it was basically, you know, what you were seeing in terms of the topography and where the towns and airfields were and things like that, which is quite useful. And we were going into a lot of them supporting the army, moving around their camps and things. Yeah, there's some very interesting airfields we had to go into there up in the Highlands. And,
did you see any wartime aircraft?
Yeah, we did.
Yep.
Yeah, we were based at WBAG, and WBAG had a lot of aeroplanes there that were left behind. In fact, outside our camp on the airfield, we had the whole front end of a P-38 Lightning all rusted out, but stuck up in front of the tent as a memento. You know, still had the machine guns in the nose of it too, but a corroded hull. You know. Also flew over Coral Atoll south of Numfor, where 3 P-38 Lightnings had ditched in big formation on the Coral Atoll. You can still see the outline in the water. Went down low and had a look, but they were exposed at low tide, so they were all corroded away. But there were lots of bits and pieces around. So very interesting. Some of the other things we got to do in the Caribou was parachuting. Some of the more interesting stuff is working with the SAS regiment, you know, the commandos over in Western Australia. And we used to have to go over there once a year, and they had to basically re-qualify their whole unit, which meant that everybody in the regiment had to jump out the back of the Caribou once a year to get re-qualified. Now the commando guys love this stuff. You know, that was what that was their bread and butter. But the rest of the unit, you know, like the cooks and bottle washers, the adminos and everybody else, they did it reluctantly. so we used to fly around. We used to go to a place called Corrigan, which is out to the east of Perth, where it was quiet and away from the built-up areas and everything. And we just used to fly around for 2 or 3 weeks, just chucking people out the back of the aeroplane until everyone got their tick in the box. Know what's going on there.
And come up with it.
Yeah. And yeah, so the Army Commando guys are actually used to be the dispatchers that would actually control what was going on in the back of the aeroplane. We used to just basically fly a big racetrack pattern. And each time they would sort of send 6 guys out on a static line jump, which means they're all hooked up, and when they jumped out, their chute opened, and that's all they had to do was land. And by the time we put 20 guys out the back, all we had left was the commando dispatcher in the back of the aeroplane. And he used to have a free fall chute on, just in case he accidentally fell out. He accidentally fell out every time. He never actually landed once with the aeroplane. He used to jump out at 1,000 feet with a free fall chute. That's how crazy they were. Some of the other things we did, they were testing at the time I was there, high altitude, high opening parachutes, so basically standoff parachute drops. So we used to go up to 15,000, 16,000 feet, and this is when the square rig chutes were fairly new that everyone uses for sport chutes now. And they used to jump out 15,000 feet with a GPS, having worked out what their likely drift is, and then glide back to the airfield, and they go 20 or 30 miles. And they do six together in formation, and one guy had the GPS, and they'd all stick together, and then they'd go 20 or 30 miles. And the idea being that in the event of being needed somewhere, you didn't have to fly an aeroplane over the target. You could fly it 30 miles upwind away and chuck them out there, and no one need know that they'd come in. Later on they did it in a C-130, and they were going up to 30,000 feet and going twice as far. But we were doing it without oxygen with the guys, and just to test it all out. But that was quite interesting. The other type of jumping was the opposite of that. They wanted to see how many people they could get on the ground out of the back of a Caribou without us being detected by radar. So we were flying around at ultra low level. We used to often fly 50 feet. We're authorised 50 feet flying in this aeroplane, legally, and wingspan's 97 feet, so it's half a wingspan of the aeroplane. And we used to fly around out the back of Perth with the military training area there, and there was an airfield there called Gin, which was used for the Maggies for training. And the idea was we had 23 people in the back of the aeroplane, and we wanted to see if we could get them on the ground at Gin without the radar detecting us. So they knew we were coming in, but they didn't know what direction, what time. And I said to the commando guys, I said, how low do you want to drop from? They said, don't you worry about that. You fly in, and you tell me when we're over the airfield, and I'll start chucking them out the back when I'm ready. Well, I came in at 50 feet, and I said, I'm going to commence my pull-up now. And by the time I got to 300 feet, he said, we've got 23 guys out the back. You can dive down again now. And the radar detected us one blip. Well, there was one blip every 12 seconds on the radar. They saw us with one blip. We got 23 people on the ground, we dived back down again. So quite interesting stuff he used to do with the aeroplane. Another thing that I did, a lot of people think the Caribou, because it's unpressurised and slow and everything else, it doesn't have much performance. For something to do one day when we were flying around out at Richmond, I wanted to see how high the aeroplane would go, because we were bored. It was Christmas break, and you had to maintain a presence out there, and so somebody had to go flying every day just so they knew the Air Force was awake. And I requested to go out to the training area up to flight level 300, and they said, the air traffic control said, confirm flight level 300. I said, affirmative. Confirm you're a Caribou? So off we went. Well, it took an hour and a half, and we gave up at flight level 280 because it was too cold. And then we thought, well, that's pretty high for Caribou, and then we came back down, and having taken an hour and a half to get up, we came down in 8 minutes. Because it's got lots of drag when you're coming down.
Was there much cooling when you did that, when you dropped on the altitude?
Well, yes, but radial engines don't suffer as badly as inline engines do, so yeah, you keep an eye on that. And yeah, we're right on the limits, but we did get it down, and we did come down at V&E, which was 220 knots.
Was there a temperature you couldn't go below?
Yeah, there was. I can't remember what it was, but we kept just above it. Right. I used to crack a little bit of power now and again just to keep it up there.
Yeah, the tank pilots had the same problem at Gawler years ago. Used to crack their heads all the time.
Yeah.
So they had to
radial engines, because everything was presented basically the same amount of airflow, then they didn't suffer the same uneven cooling. The other thing we used to do in our squadron, we used to try and have a record for a flight from Edinburgh to Richmond, because in winter time you get the prevailing jet stream, and the normal flight time was 3 hours plus, at 150 knots. But in winter time, you get the forecast out and the jet stream would be going over. And we used to sort of say, well, I wonder what sort of ground speed we can get today. So we used to go up to 25,000 feet, and instead of getting 150 knots, we're getting over 300 knots. And I think the record flight time was about 1 hour 45 or something in a Caribou from Adelaide to Sydney, which was pretty good.